who's a wealth manager, and he's really starting to get his feet wet here in Naples. He's been really nice to work with, and anytime, if I get to see you on a closing, and say it's your personal closing, and you handled yourself with class and dignity, and you kind of, everyone just enjoys working with you, then I want to see, well, what else do you do? How else can I work with you? And so there's a guy, Connor Johnson, who works for a big wealth management company called Stifel. They're amazing. It's just been very impressive. And it's kind of one of these like all-in type of services where they want to be able to service you with everything that you need. So there are people like that we get to connect with. There are 1031 people. There's inspectors and insurance brokers. We get asked every single day about insurance and who we would recommend. CPAs, I know who I use and who we like working with. And so if you have people like that in your life, keep them on a short list and share them with us, and we'll share ours with you if you need something. I think that kind of goes to, the full service nature of this business, is that we want people to, if they have a question, they don't know if we're going to be able to answer it for them, but they want to hear our opinion, or they want to know who we like to work with. I think it's just an incredible opportunity to serve a client all the way around. So
I think it goes beyond that. I mean, you get people coming from other parts of the state, and they've asked, what schools we recommend, what's our favorite restaurant.
What is your favorite restaurant?
Right now, probably your mother, obviously.
Good answer. She's not watching, don't worry.
Okay. I mean, Truluck's, but it's been a while since I've been there. Any place,
yep, down on Fifth.
And you want good food and not too busy for me.
So this is going to sound a little pretentious, but right now, restaurants are awesome around here. We've got Mercado right down the street, but I think there are probably two restaurants that I think are really cool. There's Brick Tops, which is down in Waterside. I just think that place is amazing.
You know
but it's so loud during the day. If you just maybe eat outside, recommend that. But also, like, if you really want to treat someone, you got a client coming into town and they want to be able to understand why Naples is special. I like the Ritz. It sounds ridiculous, but they have like this small little restaurant on the beach, and you've got maybe a $25 or $30 hamburger, but you're on the beach at the Ritz, and it just gives this feeling of like, I'm really treating the client. Like it's just different than just going to just a good burger place, because it's all it is a good burger.
You and I, it was very nice.
I was trying to sweet talk you, and so I brought you to that place.
It must have worked.
But Susan, she agrees. Gumbo Limbo. That place is fantastic. But I think, like, we work with Carmen Falbo, who's an accountant here in town. He owns Vanguard Tax Services. He's incredible. Highly recommend him. We have Rosa Scola, who does a lot of our FERPTA deals. Rosa's actually a neighbor of yours, Dad, and she's just incredible. She's a CPA. She speaks, what, 5 languages, Dad?
She speaks 5 languages, and the thing that impressed me, I mean, other than her just being an incredibly nice lady and knowing what she's doing, because she's from Price Waterhouse originally, she showed up for closings. I mean, she'd be all dressed up and she'd speak the person's language, and some of these people were, quite, wound up like they are with a lot of real estate closings. And Rosa was very helpful in just reassuring them that this had been done correctly.
Yeah, so now I'm realizing I took Mike to Gumbo Limbo as well, so that's my spot apparently.
Better yet, you paid.
I did. That doesn't always happen. All right, well, so thank you for joining. Just to kind of close that all out, I think if we can, if you guys ever need a referral to someone, insurance or otherwise, Mike, it's kind of why I like having you on here. You've been, you're kind of one of my favorites in this industry, because you're so even-mannered. You're always looking for the solution, and that's how we've stayed connected. It's not because I have to work with you; it's because I kind of like it.
He has to work with me.
He has to work with you. He doesn't have to work with me, but it just kind of it just kind of works. You know, everyone has a role to play. And I always go back to when you're in school and, you know, you're on a project together. Maybe there are 5 classmates all on the same project. Not everyone pulls their weight, but when you find the people that do, you got to stick with them. Those are your, you know, those are your real compadres.
You need a team.
Mike, who's on your top list? Who's one of the favorite people for you to collaborate with or that you like in this town?
Outside of the firm?
Yeah, yeah. You don't have. It's not about us. We know we're great, but
I actually have a new person. I mean, we're all dealing with excessive homeowners insurance renewals, and I've discovered a new firm that's doing wonders for me.
what's their
It's
name?
not just homeowners; it's also auto insurance, which is a big deal these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just moved their firm into our complex here in the Galleria Shopping Center. It's Chapman Insurance, and I'm telling you, he's done wonders. And when we got into auto insurance, he explained to me that each insurance company has a different pool of policyholders, and some pools are you know, have more risk in them than others. And so, I mean, he saved me quite a bit.
So he works with different underwriters, Mike. He's not a captive insurer.
He can work with a variety of insurance carriers, so
That's
he's
great.
not beholden to one or whatever. But I mean, he made a big difference, and we're still working on, you know, like you, Don. You know, you've got auto, you've got homeowners, you got umbrella, you got, you know, so it's kind of a package thing. But it definitely pays right now with what's going on in insurance to shop around and see what's out there.
Yeah, we have assured partners on the second floor in this building who I have insurance with. They've done a good job. There's Vanderbilt Insurance, which were half my office. They use them personally. So there are lots of great options out there. Just keep that in mind and keep your short list and keep it short. You know, don't put someone on there that you wouldn't use yourself or don't have an answer to. But Mike, you actually came up with today's topic. And it kind of correlates. The transition might be a little awkward, but the reason why I think it's important you work with people you trust is that there's a lot of risk in dealing with people that you don't know. And it goes to scams. You see that transition there? See how I did that?
Boy,
So
that was smooth.
that was smooth. I know what I'm getting when I'm dealing with Janet Sham at 1031 Old Republic Exchange. I know what I'm getting when I have Rosa Scola on the other side for doing FERPTA withholding and things of that nature. But you don't know if you have like a cold referral, someone who reaches out to you because they like your website.
Right.
And Mike, you kind of brought this topic to the forefront because you at times you feel totally helpless with a scam. You know, once you realize that there might be a problem here, then you think everything is at risk. And so kind of what's your general mindset on scams in real estate? What do you think is the biggest issue and how do you conduct yourself on that?
Well, Don and I talk about this frequently because there are a lot of scams that pop up every year. But one of Don's best pieces of advice is trust your gut feeling. If it's something you haven't seen before or doesn't feel right, then maybe you need to ask a couple more questions. But you know, we've seen a lot through the years. I mean, I first worked with Don on, you know, I'm going back probably 10, 12 years ago. There was a mortgage fraud scheme down on Marco Island.
All right, this is
Marco.
great. I had that on my list as the first thing to talk about. What is mortgage fraud? Dad, what is mortgage fraud?
That's lying to your lender in a nutshell, or
Okay,
putting
good. Yeah.
false information on a closing statement, which Mike and I ran into years ago. We had all those short sales, and the sellers were setting up third-party LLCs and making, you know, $400,000 payments to these LLCs that they actually owned. So it wasn't a true short sale.
All right, so let me see if I understand what was happening. They were trying to inflate the price of these places, right? So you take a condo building and you do a couple of fake sales where you're paying transfer taxes and showing what the consideration is, but it's totally a made up number, right?
No, they're making up fraudulent creditors who would have to get paid out of closing, and the seller would get zero.
Oh, okay.
So
All
they
right,
they
so well,
they
let's
created
explain a short sale. So generally with a short sale, it's when the mortgage is higher than the value
the
of the
market
property.
value of the contract price of the
So
property.
a short sale is when you go to the bank and say, hey, look, it's just not worth what I owe you.
Yeah,
So will you take a lesser payoff on the mortgage? But there are conditions, right? The lender obviously has to approve it. The other condition is that the seller cannot make any money from the sale.
no money. Every dime goes to the lender, every single dime. And what these sellers were doing were creating fraudulent creditors that they owned. They owned the LLC. So
Right.
money being funneled off to them. And we actually had the FBI subpoena a number of files. And it got more involved. So
Did they catch Mike? Did they catch him?
kept
Yeah, I
us.
actually think it worked out well, but it was scary. I mean, because it's something that I'd never seen before. Don had come across this, I believe, once I brought to Don's attention that, and this was all over. I mean, this was all over the area. It was a pretty big ring.
Yeah, so what they would do is they would file a loan against or a mortgage against the property or some sort of mechanics lien or something.
It's payable to a LLC that they owned, and because I did tax fraud litigation when I got out of school, and I knew an assistant U.S. attorney that we had worked with before, way back in the early '80s. So Mike and I would go over and see him, Vinny Flynn, and Vinny took care of the FBI for us. And
Yeah,
we
so
had
that's one way that you would see mortgage fraud. That's pretty extreme. If you see a market where you are experiencing short sales, everything's got to be on the up and up. There can't be any of that sort of stuff. And obviously, if you're a realtor and you're feeling like there's something going on, that's when you dip into your vendors, the people that you trust, and say, hey, look, I don't know what this could be, but it doesn't seem right. Can you help me think about it?
yeah.
Because
And
I haven't seen that. That's not something I've ever dealt
Well,
with.
and a lot of times, Christian, I mean, the more you do it, you start to notice it's not so much what is said, but what is not said. And you might have seen an issue 10,000 times, and every single time they would bring up a specific point, but this one time they didn't. And that would always hit me like, well, why aren't they asking about that same thing the other 10,000 people always do?
Yeah,
So
there's like a rhythm to a transaction, and
there's a real
there should be somewhat of an expected process for that. That makes a lot of sense. I always made the analogy to like a quarterback who's in the pocket, and
right.
they have the 4-second clock in their head, and they can't see behind them. They can't see their blind side, but they know their 4 seconds is up. So if they don't get rid of the ball, even if there's no one behind them, they're probably throwing it anyways, right? They don't want to get hit
Yeah.
because they know they can only keep defenders away for so long.
The other twist to that, Don and Christian, is the addendum that doesn't get submitted to the lender. Where you've got the contract and they put something big on an addendum and they don't show that to the lender.
So Mike, what are you thinking they're trying to do there? Why would they even play that game?
They're not giving the lender the full picture. In other words, they might inflate the value of the furniture, and that's on the addendum. Right. They lower the price of the property, but inflate the value of the furniture. So there's different reasons, but it's still they're trying to deceive.
Yeah, so there are these basic rules for mortgages. Basic rules. Number one, they don't like giving a 30-year mortgage on the couch. It's not good business for the lender. So they want that totally separate. And we want just to protect the seller in the very least, is that we want real value for the furniture and then the rest of the value for the real estate, and they need to be separate. So the buyer's paying $10,000 for the furniture with a check or whatever, and then the lender will deal with the $490,000 purchase that appraised at that number. If you were to try and put it together, well, even if you left off and did an addendum somewhere else, but it was for $0, you could have an appraisal issue. And now the seller's stuck that the buyer could put some pressure on it. So we do it 2 separate contracts where furniture is for value, the real estate is for value. But then we also don't get too extreme, right, Dad? Isn't that another scam where you could maybe overinflate the value of the
If
furniture?
you get too extreme, then you're understating the value of the property. Some of our clients we deal with work for companies that are publicly traded, so they're subject to the SEC rules. I've had that where they just don't want to have $400,000 allocated to the furniture, which is an actual case, because the SEC would be looking at it. A lot of people think, with the furniture thing, that they're going to lower their ad valorem taxes, and that's why they push for it. So, when I got it, I'd first make sure the realtor was getting paid on that 400,000, that there was some sort of appraisal to back it up. If you have a multi-million-dollar condo, you might have $400,000 worth of furniture, and that you're not lying to the bank to get the whole thing.
In fact, on that
Right,
point,
but it's a pain.
on that point, a lot of people don't realize this, but the counties will send you a questionnaire. Call your county in the very least.
All right.
Send a questionnaire after closing, and it asks the buyer to answer a couple of questions. And one of them is, did you buy furniture separately? And they have a caveat. They say that was more than 10% of the purchase price. So
Right.
you can answer no if it was less than 10% and you're fine. But if it's more, that's what they seem as like, oh, we need to know about that. That's different.
They want to know if it was an arm's length transaction. They want to know if there's additional consideration. And this you've heard this story about the New York judge who was buying some property, and he wanted to allocate, it was 400,000 again. It always seems to be that number, to the furniture to knock down his ad valorem. And all I did was call the tax appraiser's office. They have a condo person there, and it was the Biltmore, and she told me, we look at what's sold on the floor above that, what's sold on the floor below that, we're going with that. And so I just called the New York judge back and said, Your Honor, call so-and-so at the appraiser's office. This isn't going to make any difference, but I want you to call her yourself. So you're not taking my word for it. You can hear her tell you how they do it.
So that's not necessarily a mortgage scam, but it's like kind of like the first cousin of mortgage scams, where you think you're getting away with something, but the reality is that it doesn't really work that way. Doesn't really help.
And sometimes it hurts them to do this. I mean,
Yeah.
as I explained to the judge, you're taken away from your cost basis in the property. So when you turn around and sell it down the road, let's say it's a second home, you're going to pay capital gains on that $400,000 reduction. You're going to have more of a profit. And
Mike, I don't mean to give you a heart attack, but technically we're not supposed to be earning commission on furniture sales that are not related to the real estate. So it gets kind of tricky. You have to have a license to do certain furniture sales if it's not part of closing. Don't want to worry. You can stop sweating, Mike. It'll be okay.
The other twist to this, and I think the attorneys and title companies are very knowledgeable in this area now, but for a while there, we were getting people that were putting a deposit down on buying a property and then voiding the deal real quick and want their money back before that check's cleared, only to find out the check was bogus. And I remember one case, it was $1 million. It wasn't our company, it was another company, but $1 million from someone overseas. And the attorney almost returned the $1 million. He caught it at the last second. Thank God he caught it.
Yeah, and that goes to why in the NABOR contract, it says if you're within 15 days of closing, all checks have to be wired, or all money has to be wired. Yeah. It's because we want good funds. We want to know that you're ready to close, and then, because I got to pay everybody with that money. I got to pay the seller, I've got to pay the real estate agents, and so on and so forth. So it kind of is the same thing. And we do that with our office. You write a check for $1 million deposit, and then you terminate the next day and you say, I want my money, I want my money, I want my money. We make you wait 7 to 10 days until it clears, and then we'll give it to you. So yeah, that's definitely a scam that happens very, very much so. I'll give you a couple of examples on other mortgage scams that I've dealt with personally. Mm-hmm. And this one was a little bit too close to home. So I did a closing, and then 6 months later, I got a call from the mortgage broker and said, hey, I got a problem. I need to meet with you. you know, tomorrow or whatever. So he comes in and he brings two other people with him, the buyer from that closing and an investor. And so the broker says, hey, look, I got a call from underwriting. They discovered that you forged W-2s, forged them. And
What?
yeah, and so they're making my broker, so this is the mortgage broker, buy back the loan. And the mortgage broker will press charges unless she agrees to sell to someone. And he pointed to the investor and said, to him. So follow me on this one. She forged W-2s to show that she had a certain amount of income. The lender gave her the loan based on that information. She closes on the house, and then in their audit, they did a post-closing audit. They discovered that those W-2s were fraudulent because they couldn't match them up with the tax return that she filed shortly thereafter. And then they dug a little deeper. They called the employer, and who said, nope, she no longer works for us. We did not pay her in 2022, 2023.
Wow.
Yeah, so normally, you know, what would happen in that case, and Dad, correct me if I'm wrong, is they'd call the FBI. I mean, that's a felony, right?
Yeah,
That's mortgage fraud.
it's a crime to lie to a bank. That's why we have
Right.
penalties.
So, but the lender, this is the main lender, the one that actually fronted the money, bought the
Right.
loan. They just said, look, we're not dealing with this. We're giving all this back to the broker. So this was the mortgage broker had to buy back the loan. So now the underwriter's like, all right, I'm out. And now you just have the local broker that's trying to find a solution. They could have and probably should have submitted that to the FBI, but instead they gave her another option. So that is as ugly as it gets in my mind, as someone that was inflating their income to then get the loan. Because yeah, there are all these different rules for how we qualify a borrower. And if you forge that stuff, if you push too hard on it, that's a crime. That's a felony. That's jail time, at least 1 year. And she had kids and all this stuff. The crazy part of that deal is that the lender told me after the fact, he said, she didn't need to do it. She didn't need to forge the W-2s. He could have qualified her without it. She had a business 1099 and it would have been fine. And she did it anyways. And it was a really good lesson for me, not because I did anything wrong on that deal. I didn't have any clue what was going on. The lesson to me was I'm totally upfront with lenders. I don't hide amendments. I don't, number it instead of amendment number 1 and 1B. That's mortgage fraud. We don't play that game. That doesn't work. If you have to resort to that stuff, then it doesn't close. It's really that simple. And you really only build that kind of, discipline if you keep busy and you have other files and you don't put too many eggs in just one closing. But it's, Dad, I mean, that sounds right. If you only have one closing, you're more apt to
You're more apt to make mistakes because you don't have a track record of, like I was talking about earlier, seeing something for 10,000 times and then something was missing. I mean, the more you do it, you start to see patterns emerge. And when those patterns deviate or there's some outlier, you dig deeper and try to find out what's going on. And the side point is, if it were you doing it or some realtor doing it, we're all held to a higher standard than the average guy. I mean, this is what we do for a living. So they're going to expect a higher degree of compliance with the law. There's going to be less compassion if they catch you doing something.
Right, exactly. Now, the other times I see this, and this was more recent, and it's a lot more common than you might think. There was, I think there was a deal just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm trying to think what the repair was for. It might have been a roof repair. I think that's what it was. It was a roof repair. The seller agreed to do it, but they couldn't get it done prior to closing. And per the NABOR contract, the seller is supposed to put money in escrow pending that work. Well, lenders do not like roof repairs. They don't want to see it. They want the roof to be well. There's certain things that the lender says are off limits, and closing with a pending roof repair is one of those things. So roof, foundation, safety issues, those are like red flags to them. They won't close if you haven't fixed the roof. And this part really bugged me because, you know, they're in this spot. You're 10 days away from closing. It's not going to happen. The contract says escrow, and the
Mhm.
lender says we can't do that. Do you want to know what the lender suggested, Dad?
Change it to closing costs, prepaids and escrows. Get a credit,
Not even that. They couldn't do that because that was my suggestion.
an addendum that
Um,
they submit.
He said to just deal with it outside of closing.
Wow.
Oh,
No, it's not
Did he put
okay.
that in an email? It probably didn't
Yeah.
put it in an email.
He probably didn't, but the buyer's agent called me and said, hey, I talked, because I told him, I said, hey, look, here's some suggestion. Here are some options. The option number one was delay closing. Option number two is pay it directly to the roofer. Option number three is we collect it on the settlement statement and we pay it to the roofer on the settlement statement, but then I give the checks to the buyer. And then, you know, when the work gets done, the buyer pays the roofer. Another option is, what would the other option was to give them a credit for closing costs and prepaids, right? But
Right.
the lender said, look, we can't take any more closing costs and prepaids. We're at our maximum. The buyer can't take any more credits. So that's when the lender said, but just pay it outside of closing. Now, I'm not going to get myself in any trouble. I'll say hypothetically on this, but you know, if hypothetically it's a $200 repair and it's a $500,000 purchase, so be it, right? Deal with it, you know, give them a bunch of credit gift cards, or write it, you know, maybe they just, you know, $200 falls out of the seller's pocket. I don't know. But this was not that. This was like $10,000. You can't just hide $10,000 between accounts. That's not something you can sweep under the
No.
rug. That's a big repair, and the lender never would have closed without it. Honestly,
How about if you're representing just the seller and you have a buyer getting a mortgage and a buyer who wants 200% of the estimated cost to complete the repairs on the closing statement? I know how I've handled it in the past.
yeah, tell me, what are you thinking on that?
Well, when I'm talking to the other attorney, I say, well, yes, your buyer has the right to apply for a mortgage. Yes, your buyer is entitled to 200%. But if your various rights conflict with each other, that's not my problem. So pick which right you want. If you want a mortgage, you're going to have to eat the $10,000 in escrow.
Because you can't take it, because it
I'm
can't be.
willing to comply with the contract, but I am not going to change our position or our wording on anything.
Yeah, I think there's it's every situation's a little bit different. When I bought my house, you know, the lender, I think I negotiated a $40,000 credit because the roof needed to be replaced,
Right.
a couple other things. I couldn't take a $40,000 credit. That was never going to happen. The lender, I
Right.
was at my maximum. So what we did is I took $5,000 or $10,000 as a credit, and the balance we did as a price reduction. And that's instead of an escrow. You know, the seller would have had to do a $80,000 escrow, and I said, let's not do that. Just give me it as a credit. I'll take it right now. Now the
Yeah.
difference there is that not all that went into my pocket. You know, you don't see a $40,000 difference in your wallet right at closing. So you would have to have extra money to pay for the repair. And that, you know, if you had to do a price reduction, it's not dollar for dollar at closing. You don't save $40,000 that you can then go spend. You save
Yeah.
40,000 over the loan period, basically.
My point though is let's assume the buyer's been a royal pain in the rear end and the attorney on the other side has been a royal pain in the rear end. The seller does not have to agree to the price reduction.
No,
We have
they
we have a
don't.
contract. I'll live up to every comma in that contract.
You know what I would do in that case, Dad?
What's that?
I would probably terminate under my financing contingency.
There you go.
See? There's two ways to skin a cat. So
Yeah.
you could, you know, the seller's got their priorities, the buyer has their priorities, and you just have to keep your eyes peeled. And again, that's
In the
why
market.
you need some experienced people. And this kind of leads to the next point I wanted to hit before we moved on. I had two agents at least just this week. It's only Wednesday. I had two agents tell me, I wish I knew more about mortgages. I wish I knew how to do them more. I just don't do them very often. You know, all our deals are cash. And then this one, I just wish I knew more about it. You're not alone. In this town, most of the deals are cash. There are a lot of agents who could go an entire career without doing a single loan deal. it's just your reality. I wouldn't fight the current on that one. I think you just have to have people in your life that you can lean on, that you can get good advice. You got to make sure that your buyer is using a really good lender. Dad, was it this past weekend we wrote the article about local lenders?
But yes, it was.
Yeah, and so if you haven't, look at that article that we wrote. We'll put it on our website at some point, but it basically said we've always extolled the powers of a local lenders, a local lender. There's inside joke there. We've always liked the local lenders, but here's an additional reason. And we were talking about the condo statutes that Florida passed and all that.
Right.
Here's another reason. You kind of need a lender who knows what they're doing. You need a lender that is tuned in, that knows how the NABOR contract works, knows how the FARBAR contract works, realizes that there's escrows. And as soon as they hear that inspections come up and that there might be a roof repair, the lender needs to be singing from the top of the roof that we got to deal with this now. If you have a lender who's from Boston or Delaware, they're not even going to assume that that's a thing. When I was practicing in Georgia, there were no escrows. We never did escrows. That was not possible because we knew how lenders worked. South Florida, we do escrows on like every deal. It's awful. I hate escrows. Dad, why don't we like escrows?
Because people argue after the closing about the escrow, they argue about, even though the escrow is very clear when the money should be released, the buyer might have found something different. It eats up a lot of the realtor's time post-closing. It eats up a lot of our time post-closing. And we still get screamed at if the seller won't sign the release.
If you guys want to go look at a Google review that I had, this was, I don't know, a year ago, maybe a little less.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, we had a $50,000 escrow for a roof repair, and the seller got really angry. That she thought that the buyer was playing games. She thought that all this was going on behind the scenes, and she got totally belligerent. She was awful to us. And when she didn't get her way, she put the worst Google review I've ever had. It was like a 1-star, all caps, I'm basically a criminal. So it is what it is. No one has a perfect reputation, right? So that's me being a little bit vulnerable. It's out there. You can look on Google. Luckily, Dad, we hit 100 Google reviews recently, which I am thrilled about. I think
your mother
more than Mike Hughes, that's for sure.
I've got a scam story that's very interesting, but I don't know what I'll
go. We're done on mortgage scams. Go to the next one, Mike.
All right, here's a real one, scary one, and this is Downing Fry. We had someone who was committing mortgage fraud. He was the buyer was going to inflate the price of the property, do a bogus big credit against it. And fortunately, our agent trusted her gut instinct, brought it into the Downing Fry conference room. I met with the guy and I met with his agent who was at another company. And after we got done the meeting, I told our agent, I said, stay away from it. He's committing mortgage fraud. And so then we let the other agent at the other company know what was going on. And she said, Mike, this guy's legit. I've done 35 deals with him. And it was the same thing over and over and over. So the lesson there is just because this guy's done it a bunch of times doesn't mean it's legitimate.
Yeah.
Now, what happened, Christian, 5 years later, the guy surfaces again and tries it on another Downing Fry agent. I told the agent, stay away from it. He's committing mortgage fraud. The agent came to me and said, but I'll lose 60,000 in commissions. And I said, it beats the alternative.
You wrote him a check, right? You covered that?
She quit our company. A year later, they picked up that guy. It was front page headlines in Naples Daily News, and he had been running a fraud ring. And what I didn't tell our agent is that I crossed paths with this guy 5 years earlier. And the other agent called me up that day with the other company and said, Mike, I've got cases of files next to my door. I'm just waiting on the FBI to show up. And so this is real. This kind of stuff does happen. Yeah. This guy, the fraudster, came into our agent's open house. That's how she was approached by him, at an open house. So
I had a client who tried to do this 2 different times, and neither time did the seller go for it, and I was relieved. But he would say, you know, hey, I'll give you 750,000, but I want the purchase price to list 800,000, and I want you to give me a $50,000 credit at closing, so that of record it shows 800,000, but the real net is 750. And he was doing that so that he could get a bigger loan than he otherwise could have. You know, the lenders have limits on how much they'll lend against the purchase price of the property. So let's say, you know, the lender will only give you 90%. So on an $800,000 deal, you could get a $720,000 loan, as opposed to a, well, I don't know what it would be, $700,000 loan, or it would actually be a $675,000 loan. So he's incentivized because he can get an extra 50 grand from the lender just by having that extra credit on there. And even if they let him, he probably would have asked for $1 million and a $250,000 credit, so he could get more than the house was actually worth. And that is absolutely mortgage fraud. You know, the argument, I suppose, is that it's all in the contract. The lender could look and see what kind of credits are being given. It would be on the settlement statement. It's not something that could ever be done outside the settlement statement. But it has this weird feel to it. And, you know, honestly, the listing agents on both of the deals caught onto it and said, we're not playing that game. We're not doing that.
My first mortgage fraud was when I was still in law school, and it was Seawinds on Marco Island. My father had the listing on the property, and you know, the developer, bottom line, the developer got indicted, the attorney got indicted and lost his license, Guy Deloche. They were sending out fraudulent deposit receipts. You had buyers who are getting reappraisals before closing and taking money out of the closing, refinancing before they close, and then never making a single mortgage payment. So the FBI came down on Seawinds big time, and this is either my second or third year of law school, indicting all these people I know. I knew the developer, I knew the attorney, I knew the realtors, I knew the original owner of the land. So it's been around forever, and people think it'll never happen to them. And it's amazingly enough, between the mortgage fraud Mike and I dealt with the FBI, and just, you know, my own father and what was going on in Marco, every 5-10 years, this thing rears its ugly head. Now I think it's becoming way more common.
When you live in an affluent area, you're a target, you know?
Yeah, I even saw that on a cash deal. So it wasn't necessarily very clear on whether it was mortgage fraud, but I think what they were trying to do is let's do the same number, the 800, and they would say, give me a $50,000 credit, but it's all cash. They were not getting a loan. And I think what they were doing is they were trying to inflate the values of the properties in that community. So maybe they owned a half a dozen properties that, you know, and they're not going to mortgage them today, but they're going to mortgage them tomorrow. That's for sure, because now the value has gone up. And they would do that just to kind of create this false market. It's essentially a Ponzi scheme.
We had that with the former U.S. attorney. Mike and I went over to see in Miami during this short sale scandal. He was saying on an all cash deal, and his name, you know, Vincent Flynn, that you could be committing mortgage fraud because that sale is going to be used as a comp within the building.
Other deals that are mortgaged. Yeah.
And at the time, I thought he was crazy. I didn't quite buy it, but you know, in retrospect, I think he's right.
I think he's right. It's something that, who knows, you know, what kind of liability you have. Mike, before we close out, I did have a question for you. You know, we get buyers from all over the country, all over the world, and occasionally they'll come in, they'll see a listing of yours, and they'll say, hey, I'm a real estate agent in Texas, and I expect a referral fee. I'm not an agent in Florida, but I want a referral fee. Do you have any suggestions for us on how your office deals with that, and any advice you might have to an agent in that situation?
It puts you in an awkward situation because honestly, if you say, wait a minute, you didn't bring that up early on, you brought that up the week before we're going to close. Your concern is, if you draw a hard line, is it going to cause the deal to blow up? So it's kind of a judgment call on the agent on how hard do they want to fight it. First off, you know, sometimes these agents work at a brokerage firm where they're on a split, and they want you to credit that referral fee direct to them as the buyer, and in effect cut out their broker. So, that's something you got to think about also. But it really is a judgment call. My feeling is if they bring it to your attention early, when they first meet you, look at the property, all right, then they were upfront on it. But they bring it in late in the game, well, wait a minute. That just doesn't feel right. And sometimes we'll draw a hard line and say, no, if you let us know this up front, we probably would have done something.
Yeah,
But
so I think that's really good advice, and I'll add to it. I remember when I was first managing a staff, and this was in Atlanta. I had someone who was kind of, I had one of my employees who was a problem. She kind of made a big scene in front of a whole group of people, and I was so shocked by it, I didn't even know how to respond. I just kind of took it, and then I got upset later, and I started to think about what I want to do. But the damage had kind of been done because it was in front of everybody, right? And so I kind of I convinced myself at that point, try not to be surprised when that stuff comes up. Think about it in advance. And this is one of those things I think you can think about in advance. Have your go-to number. Here's what we normally do on referral fees. So like, I don't know, everything is very different, but let's say if it's another realtor from Atlanta and they're referring you a client, your go-to is 25% of whatever the commission might be. That's a go-to. Yep, here's what it is. This is my standard. It's just a standard thing. And then if it's this situation, have a standard thing. Like you said, Mike, they bring it up early. And they say, hey, I'm an agent in Delaware. I would like to get a referral fee on this. And you say, all right, on deals like that, here's how I deal with it. And it's different if you're the listing agent and you're potentially getting both sides of the deal, or if you're just the buyer's agent and they want you to cut them in as being their buyer. Have a different answer for each of those potentially. Maybe it's 10% or 5%, or if you already took a cut, your answer is no. Look, I need a minimum of blank, and otherwise I don't do referrals. And on this one, unfortunately, I'm not making that minimum, so I can't do a referral fee. Just build it into the process, know your mindset. And then you have other steps that I would like everyone to go through. So know in advance. The next step is to verify. So they can say whatever they want. I think you need to double check. You need to go on to the Texas or the Delaware, licensing board, get their license number. Is it active? What brokerage are they with? It's, all right, here's our number, but I need to verify. And if they're not an agent, you can't give them a referral fee. That's going to be your deal with them.
And a lot of times their license is inactive. I've come across that frequently.
Well, and there's inactive, and then like I just had to take my post-licensing courses, and they said if you don't take these by such and such date, your license is actually null and void. So that, inactive, probably okay. Null and void, probably not okay.
I like the
how you want to deal with that.
That's really good. I mean, as a matter of company policy, we don't do it unless the agent makes X.
And it does, you have to be careful because every deal is different, and there are all these, lawsuits about these set percentages. But you kind of need to know, like Dad, you and I, when we set our services and what we charge, we kind of know what it costs to run our business. So if we need to, we can make pretty split second decisions. The last piece on that is, like you said, Mike, we're paying the broker. We're not paying you directly, or are we paying the broker? And so ultimately, you've kind of negotiated this deal. You need to verify, and now I'm going to call my support staff at my broker, and I'm going to see, all right, what do they want? Who do they pay? How is it paid? Is it just a credit directly to the buyer at closing, or do we actually have to pay their broker in Delaware? I'm sure, there are a million different ways, but a lot of times you're not making those decisions. You're just going to say, Mike, what do you want me to do? What's the company policy? Jamie, what's the company policy? What are we doing here?
And part of it is, what's the blowback if we just say no? I mean, is this a person who's going to be using us over and over again? Are they a favored client of one of our realtors? If they're a one-off, I mean, for me, it's fairly easy to say no.
Well, and I think that's where doing the research in advance is the power. If you've already thought about how you're going to respond in this
Yeah.
particular situation, then you can quickly say no.
Yeah.
So to bring that story full circle, what I learned from my experience in managing people is the reason why I was kind of starstruck and just not acting in the moment is I don't want to just fire someone and lose all the goodwill and all the training and all the time just because of a bad moment. You know, I think people deserve a chance to let things work themselves out. And if you fire them, it's over, right? You've kind of cut the cord and you look silly bringing it back. It just doesn't work as well. So what I like doing in those situations, and every situation is going to be different, but I like to think, what are my other options short of firing them? And so I'll give you an example. I had this happen. We had a person who worked for us who just didn't show up one day. No excuse, no note, no text, didn't answer the phone. Found out, you know, she might have been partying a little hard the night before and just blew us off. And so she said, I'll come back. You know, as soon as she called, she's like, I'm coming in, just give me a minute. And I said, no, why don't you stay home for the rest of the week? It's going to be unpaid. And then come back on Monday and we'll talk about it. Because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had ideas. I could have fired her on the spot. I could have had her come back on the spot, but I kind of wanted some time to think about it. I think it's fair to them. It's fair to you. Sleep on it, even if it's just one night. Hey, come in tomorrow and let's talk. And then, you know, she came in on Monday and I said, so what do you want to do? What are you thinking? She said, I'm going to resign. I said, okay, that's fine. It kept me from having to fire her. So that was good.
Oh, and plus you didn't make an emotional decision. Those usually.
She wasn't emotional. I wasn't emotional. We thought about what if.
Yeah.
I was kind of prepared for the possibility that she'd be resigning. And obviously she did her thinking over the weekend. So it was much better. And everyone realized that it was dealt with. You know, the last thing people want is it for it to linger and to be unfair to the people that are loyal. It's like the prodigal son story. You know, the son who was always loyal was frustrated that he wasn't treated with that same level. So not to make a biblical reference, but there's your biblical reference.
Yeah, but that doesn't really work in a business. It ripples through the rest of the staff and they think they can do it too.
Well, I think you're 100% right. It's very tricky. You have to have trust in the staff has to trust you. It's not that moment. It's the all of it. And obviously I think that story, there was obviously a lot of trust. There was like, he had an answer to the question, a valid question. So.
Okay.
Awesome. See, that was a little different class today. That was a lot of fun.
Covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike, for some of those topics. I appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
All right, guys. Good luck.
Okay.